Hi ClimateLab community, I'm Fernando Sori. On behalf of the Universidad de Lorraine and Pontificia Universidad Católica do Paraná, I would like to thank you for engaging to the ClimateLab Incubation Program, or CLIP as we call it. As working package leaders, we are proud to finally launch this program and share with you all the material that we have been working on during this past month. Starting with this video, you're going to follow a series of audiovisual content and interactive workshops that we specifically designed for you, ClimateLab teams. Innovation labs and spaces, social innovation, applying living lab methods to social challenges are some of the topics that we will develop over the course of this program. However, we felt it was important to begin with the main reason and motivation that bring us all together in this project, the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. In this sense, Professors Paola Alfaro from TU Berlin University and Universidade de Genova and Harry Bollmann from Universidad Católica do Paraná have prepared a conversation around the main aspects of climate change. Based on their experiences at their universities and the projects they have been involved in, Paola and Harry discuss climate change through different facets, such as climate injustice, social infrastructure, governance, and community. We believe this is a discussion that all ClimateLab teams should have, so we invite you to watch this video and take full value of this program for your lab. I leave you.
Speaking about climate change, our planet is far too heterogeneous and environmentally complex. Part of the planet seems to be cooling, as you can see in the blue part of the image, and part of it seems to be heating up in red. So depending on the local you are and the point of view that this phenomenon is observed, theories for this or that effect appear. In any case, it seems undeniable that we are living in a period of climate crisis, where the phenomena is getting worse year by year. The climate extremes are getting more and more intense, heavy rains causing floods, prolonging droughts causing fires, and heat causing environmental imbalance. And the consequences of these changes are also different in each part of the planet. Even here in Brazil, which is a country of continental size, different consequences are expected within our territory, such as the increase in the duration and frequency of droughts in the northeast, and the intensification of heavy rains in the south, where is located our ClimateLab. This reading on what are the consequences of climate change on the territory that is expected to be the target area for the labs should be for sure the first step to follow. Considering the city of Curitiba, where our lab is located, the IPCC reports show some climate change effects, like the intensification of heat islands in the urban environment. Our data showed a slow but continuous increase of 0.02 degrees Celsius per year in the last 60 years. This slow climate warming can be seen from the people in general as a positive thing, because Curitiba is the coldest capital in Brazil, and a little bit of warm in average temperature increases the thermal comfort for the population. But on the other hand, it increases air pollution, causing respiratory problems and facilitates the transmission of warm climate diseases that in the past were not found here, such as dengue, Zika, chikungunya, etc. So, among other effects, by the year of 2070, the climate warming can potentially cause greater cardiovascular problems in the elderly, loss of soil fertility and crops productivity, as well as overall changes in wildlife and natural ecosystems that we are not yet capable to properly access and monitor. The scenario of climate change effects in the city of Curitiba is not yet fully understood. Resuming the evidences we have up to now, there will be no change in the total annual rainfall, but there is a clear tendency of increasing extreme rains and prolonging drought events. Both are bad for big cities like Curitiba. So up to now, we can say that climate change will increase the risk of landslides and floods, as well as water shortages in water supply systems. Not to mention that these shortages will lead to a scenario of intensification of water pollution in the rivers. Another important issue to notice is that these effects will be more important for the most social and economically vulnerable because they have in general less economic condition, less access to the urbanities like healthcare, security, education, and they are less capable to adapt their housing and their routine to the environmental effects of climate change.
So we should enter into the understanding when we are talking about climate change. We should also talk about climate injustice, because what we are actually facing here is a global crisis triggered by environmental conditions. It means that we have to understand what kind of justice we can here put forward in terms of that when we look, for example, on who is producing the emissions of CO2 in the highest percentage, then we will understand that 49% of the most richest countries are producing the most dramatic impact on the CO2 emissions, while, for example, the last 50%, so half of the world, or I would even say 90% of the world, are suffering by the emissions that has been done or are still being produced by 10% of the most richest parts of our world. So therefore, we have to understand that the climate crisis is also a justice crisis in terms of that we are facing here a climate injustice, and we have to understand how does it look locally, what is being somehow from the global perspective produced. Here you can see, for example, that the half part of the global south are suffering from the deepest effects, which are produced mainly from the global north. So we would say that, for example, we see here in China 51 people with per capita emissions around 0.74, while we understand, for example, if we go more into the south, we see here Bangladesh, which is pretty much minor impact on CO2 emissions, while they have pretty much more people. So the injustice is really geographically to determine. And these pictures of by the Korean photographer Lee Sung Lee are explaining us very well what does this impact means in terms of loss and injustice, what those countries are running here. For example, on the shore of a vanishing island in Gonomara, West Bengal, India, where the coastline has been significantly reduced by 50% of the territory, and people are facing dramatic, let's say, water problems, and on the same time also the loss of cultural land and the loss also of food security. Or here, the futuristic archaeology in the Mongolian desert, who presents us the fact that by this injustice, this even not being participating in this climate, in this impacts on CO2, those ethnics or these groups are losing their entire cultural ground. The same thing that we are trying here to understand through the idea of climate injustice is also presented in the new urban agenda, where they are calling us that firstly, we have to interact globally on the terms, and secondly, we have to put those peoples, those local communities into consideration and into the focus, which are suffering from those impacts in itself. And these are, as we have seen in this graphics, these are the most vulnerable and these are the most poorest one, which are living in our global society, actually.
At our Climate Lab in PUC-Paraná, we are leading with the problem of preparing the city to the climate change by the use of water, energy, food nexus. This is an objective way to access sustainability in times of crisis. For example, if you are alone in a desert island, for survival purposes, you will need a secure and continuous source of water, energy, and food. Without these three elements, no way to survive. Only after solving these three aspects, we can talk about sustainability. In general terms, the analysis of the nexus showed that the water supply, energy, and food production systems that we have now are competitive for the natural waters, and they are managed through sectorial policies. This will increase the asymmetries in the access to potable water, energy, and food in the urban context. Because of the lessons we are having now with this COVID pandemics, we are expanding our analysis to a very important side effect of the nexus, which is the individual and public health. We have already a huge asymmetry in the access of healthcare systems, and we do expect the increase of this asymmetry with the increase of the number of warm climate diseases. And other important side effect that we are seeing now is the generalized pollution of the urban rivers that will be more intense with the climate change. Here we have two examples of climate injustice associated with climate change. The first one can be seen in these two maps showing the expected number of tropical diseases in Brazil in 2040 and 2070. The dark green areas in northeast Brazil are regions where there will be a high decrease of the number of the cases. In the red regions in south and southeast Brazil, there will be a high increase of the cases. In the Paraná state context, we can see in the maps below from left to right the spreading of dengue in the last 20 years. Dengue is a kind of disease that needs a vector, the mosquito Aedes aegypti, and the virus. In Curitiba, we do not have cases of dengue because of the cold climate that we have here. Mosquitoes we have a lot, but we do not have the virus because of the low average temperature. But in a scenario of climate warming, dengue will spread all over the state from west to east, all the way towards Curitiba, and in some point between the years 2040 and 2070, the temperature will rise enough to permit dengue virus and other tropical diseases to grow up, and the asymmetry that we have now in the access of healthcare systems will be more problematic. The second example is associated with more prolonged droughts that will cause a worsening in the urban rivers' water quality, because there will be less water in the river channels to dilute the pollution, and as a result, the economic costs for water treatment will rise up in water supply systems. By the way, this pictures refers to Belém River Basin in Curitiba and the target area for action of PUC-Paraná Climate Lab.
So the next important topic when we are talking about climate change is the climate change resilience. It means the capacity of inhabitants or of the society to survive and in a decent way the climate change impact. And therefore, one aspect which is very important, and it's coming pretty much more on a plate when we are talking about how to deal in an oriented way with people and in urban development. It's this understanding of having a social infrastructure. What are we talking about when we are saying social infrastructure? Will present us the next case of Chicago. Next one. 50 years ago, Chicago was hit by one of the city's worst natural disaster, an enormous heat wave that left more than 700 victims. The temperature reached 45 degrees on July 13th, 1995. And on a single day, July 15th, the number of heat-related deaths reached its highest daily value of 250. Here you can see the death rates, and you can also see the impact of, in particular, on elderly people, which was caused by the heat wave. As a social scientist, Eric Klinenberg was interested in reciting pattern in order to understand resilience. As I have said before, the ability of society to withstand natural disaster without lasting impairment. In the next slides, we can see what this has to do with social, and then in the next slide, which social infrastructure. The first pattern he observed was the most predictable, namely that poor neighborhoods, he mentioned by their per capita income in 1989, you see the most poorest one with gray and in black. He found out that the poorest neighborhood on the south and the west side of Chicago had by far the highest mortality rate. But when Klinenberg took a closer look at the pattern, he found out more. There were a number of working class neighborhoods that you can see here in the middle, like mentioned with the 38 and the 39, where he could find out that demographically looked, this would have been they should have turned out to be the most complicated one. However, they turned out to be strikingly resilient and even safer than some influent neighborhoods on the north side. Even more interesting was that there were two parts of the city where the demographics were identically. Each neighborhood had an equal proportion of old, poor, and African American people and was only separated by a street. They were literally neighboring neighborhoods, but one had an astronomically death rate and the other was on one of the safest places in Chicago. So there he coined the phrase, the palace for the people. That means how to build a more equal and united society by Eric Klinenberg means that when you take care of your public space, when you are connected with each other through social infrastructures, which are obviously also built by material qualities of the neighborhood in itself, your possibility to survive a crisis is pretty much higher because you know each other, you are having strong relationships with each other, and basically they were known where they could find people which were not on the street when this heat waves erased, so that they could go to their homes and have a look to them and bring them out and somehow bring them also to safe places. So this is the understanding why social infrastructure is very important when it comes to the resilience aspect. And we can also see this when we are talking about climate resilience. There you see, for example, that we don't need only a good technical system and not also an ecological system which is working, which in the aspect of climate change is evenly resourced. So we need also a social system which needs to be related when we are or interconnected when we are talking about urban resilience. What is very important also on the aspect is that we are talking here also on different actors which needs to be involved, from the regional to the city to the district, the neighborhood, urban block, and the building in itself. So we are talking about a concept which takes into the consideration that each part of the urban development, when we talk about interconnection, can make a contribution to this aspect of urban resilience, but they need to be interconnected. And when we are again thinking about the aspect of social infrastructure, I would like to bring here into consideration Ostrom's definition on the commons, where we can understand that our climate, our land, which is affected by climate change, we could coin this as a common good that exists when the following patterns are given: the existence of a common or a collective resources, and that term, the climate or the land in itself, a community, and the process, as you have seen in the case of Chicago, that ensures and reproduces that resources in itself.
From the governmental point of view, Curitiba has been doing its homework. The local government officially embraced the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Protocol on Sustainable Development Goals. Curitiba has been making also reports of greenhouse gas emissions every 2 years and has prepared the Plan Clima with the aim to drop down zero its greenhouse gases footprint by the year 2050. 20 alternatives out of more than 300 initially programmed actions were divided in 5 different programs to make the city more resilient to climate change, like the use of blue-green infrastructure and sustainable rain drainage technologies, using rain gardens, infiltration trenches, etc. The increase of household energetic efficiency program, solid and liquid waste management programs, the sustainable urban mobility program, in an online system of data management for decision making. Talking about social infrastructure, Curitiba is well known as the city with many parks. The parks are effective infrastructures to face the consequences of climate change because they can reduce the effect of floods, improve the water quality in the urban rivers, and store them, increasing its local availability. In addition, parks can reduce the air temperature and bring environmental functions like shelter for flora and fauna diversity. Comparing the areas with parks and the local temperature, one can see that the heat island is less intense in the parks and forested areas. This data refers to the months of November and December 2020, in the hottest months of the summer season. The problem is that the city changes slowly. If we let the responsibility 100% on the local government, maybe in 100 years the city will have the same problems that it has today. We know how to plan, to build, and to manage inevitable cities. We know the pros and cons of our kind of urbanization, and we like it. It's cultural. We maybe need generations to change the way we design more sustainable cities more prepared to face climate change. But we need answers for our climatic problems now.
When we are talking about urban design related to climate change, in that terms, we are talking about climate-proof urban development or adaptive frameworks for design patterns, then one aspect which is very much related with projects which are actually being put forward in different parts of the world is the idea of, and this is the next one which I would like to present, is rebuilt by the Design Initiative in Battery Park in New York City. It's done by the Rockefeller Foundation initiated, and it is on the aspect, and they're coining themselves with the phrase like reimagining the process by which communities create solutions to complex problems. And what is there so important is, and they're putting in their design aspect what we have learned from ClimateLabs and also from resilience framework, that whatever we are designing or trying to counteract climate change in terms of urban design and urban development, we have to take in considerations again different actors and also different parts of the governance process in itself to work on a coherent way and to interact in terms of sharing a resource and also establishing a process which can be then developed by different parts of the actors involved in the process in itself, and therefore enriching in a mutual way this development. So here you can see the problem in itself, so that nearly 50% of New York City is at risk from flooding. So there's a dramatic increase of the high of the sea level rise. So that means that nearly 220 million inhabitants are actually somehow preoccupied to lose ground under their feet, and also to lose their investment and developments. And what is interesting is that when we look further on the initiative in itself, there we will find also this understanding of the co-designing in terms of building coalitions between different actors who are interested that those parts can stay still without water, and on the other hand also making a kind of a consolidated and a progressive planning with a community design process, which give rise then to a new governance process, which can be thought as a multi-actors process, and also a process which are including different parts of governance, of the governance in itself, but also acting in an interdisciplinary way that, of course, and if we see the next slide, we can understand that here we can see when it comes, for example, how to work with this tremendous water masses which are coming over in this kind of very complex and high impact weather events, extreme weather events, which are also related with climate change impacts. So then you can understand that we are not here only talking about urban designers in ways of the planning disciplines which are here at work. Then we see here, for example, interdisciplinary team workers on architects, environment expert, planners, engineers, but also inhabitants themselves, to see what they can put on the single spot to contribute to this, but also politicians to enhance also public fundings and also the private ones interrelated with areas that they are having their commerce there, are all in a working governance together to increase the impact that you can have for enhancing the resilience for climate change. The next one example is that of Santiago de Chile, where we can see it's a very fragmented urban development in itself, while the impacts of climate change are spread over the entire city. And here we have again this kind of an injustice principle that let's say the most developed parts of the cities themselves, where you find more commercial and public infrastructure, are causing dramatic changes to the entire city landscapes in itself, right? So that when we see the vulnerabilities and risks that are related in Santiago, then you can see that the impacts here mentioned by the different zones are nearly in terms of urban sprawls, heat islands, environmental pollution, landfills, contextual vulnerability, temperature index increase, flood areas, lower index of green areas. You can see they are all related here to the area of the let's say more or less income rich parts of the community, which are related here to the east west area of the city in itself. And when we look then to how does it look then locally, you will see, for example, that these poor areas here are less equipped with let's say public infrastructures, and when you see the concentrations of the green areas, they are pretty much more related to the more wealthy districts in the areas itself, and less to the areas where the vulnerable groups live. However, and this is very important, when we look into the governance process, and there, what we have learned from the Chicago case, what is also so interesting and important, is here also the same attempt, right, to put together the different parts of the governance together, because usually you have as a first response to climate change impacts, you have in different countries, you have a lot of national plans which are somehow related with the different agreements on let's say the COP agreements and also the Senjai agreements. But when there is the need to bring this down, this kind of plans, then it requires a governance which can then be which then can be incorporated, or where can find some kind of important interconnections into the regional and the provincial one, where a lot of projects are already running in Santiago, but the interconnection of funds with resources and the projects in itself are still a pending issue which needs to be further developed. And this is in particular true when we are seeing all the efforts which are here on the below part represented by the civil society, where you see that a lot of neighborhoods by themselves, as we understood from the social infrastructure issue, are already making a big contribution to it. But the interconnection of this is always a quest, and it's always still a challenge which needs to be attended to be in the frameworks of climate change resilient enough to survive the impacts of the crisis in itself.
So we need to work directly with the community, helping vulnerable people to prepare yourself, to prepare the families, changing habits and changing its homes to face the effects of climate change. But we do need to do it with innovation. The classical way has no much credibility among the population because of the instability of the Brazilian political and economical situation. The problem of climate change can be also tackled individually by more sustainable management of rainwater, for example, permeable gardens associated with food production, systems to accumulate rainwater for non-potable purposes, and rain gardens in the streets to minimize runoff of the rainwaters. Regarding the urban food production, Curitiba is a city where part of the population do this, individually or in communities, neighborhoods, etc. PUC Paraná has organized some initiatives to create social groups for community food production. This is a way to locally contribute to the mitigation of climate change effects, because it has reflexes in two of the three basic elements of the nexus: water, energy, and food. In this image, we can see the red buildings of PUC Paraná and the surrounding area in which we have a favela and his people, vulnerable people, by the way. Work with these people is a true challenge. Nowadays, we live in an era of questioning. People question everything, including the spherical shape of our planet and the existence or not of climate change. They do not trust in governments, in politicians, police officers, do not believe in laws anymore because these laws excluded them from the society. So they must live in poor houses in favelas side by side with symbols of a rich and well-fortunate society, remembering that they are not included. It is not just investments in public infrastructures to face the effects of climate change. Society as a whole has to participate, and that, I think, will be the true challenge of our climate labs. So, I am a civil engineer by training. I think that it's due much more to the way I see the world, right? I have always had a rational look at things, seeking an explanation for even the simplest things in the life, asking why everything defined me from early childhood to the present day. Hence, the rationale of engineering and the use of mathematics as a fundamental science were linking to my training, right? I think that it was Galileo who said that mathematics is the alphabet with which God wrote the universe. I think that that way is how I think the things, right? So the limitation of this rationalist vision came later in my life, working at the Institute of Environmental Sanitation at PUC Paraná in the 1980s. The focus of the institute was the applied project. So we need to talk and to work with population. And we need it based on a theoretical and conceptual scientific basis to develop concrete solutions for the community sanitation and environmental problems. And it was for me an evolution to realize that the problem arises from the relationship of the home and the people with the environment. Hence, it involves two complex elements, the environment and demand, in this equation of science, technology, and innovation, right? And so it makes the development of solutions very difficult because they would also have to satisfy social and environmental requirements and not just those of the rational technological field. So in the 90s, I was linked to an international program called the LEAD program, Leadership for Sustainable Development, from the Rockefeller Foundation, working with colleagues from a dozen different countries. So the human dimension of this relationship was deepened by the vision that each human group has its own values, cultures, behavior, which were distinct one from the other, because they have distinct social conditions, economic conditions, cultural conditions, which impacts on the relationship of this population with the environment and with themselves. So nowadays, I think that we have another complicated element, that we are living in an era of questioning. People question everything, including the shape of our planet, the existence of or not of climate change. And well, after 35 years of academic career at PUC Paraná, I realized that this cognitive blindness of some people are not just based on superstitions or fantasies, but it depends on how we develop our science, our rational side. So I think that for that of other reasons, I think that they believe on what they believe because of the social experience that they have. So I think that the academy can change that through some kind of social experiments, working directly with this population. And here we are in this context of working in ClimateLabs. And I think that this is a very nice response of our academy to face some environmental and social problems linked to the ClimateLabs and climate change issues, right?
Thank you very much to getting this opportunity also by presenting you or making the presentation of the speech, also to get to learn a little bit more about you. And I mean, I think we both share something which I think is also the idea why we are in this program, right? It's this conviction that we need to work from let's say a perspective that we incorporate people. And I'm an architect, and I also do urban studies, and I do consultancy, but I work also in the urban field. And for me, I think this was one of the biggest learning after entering into teaching in the university and starting my PhD, that there is this kind of dimension of people, you know, people who will be using the buildings, but also will be developing with their position and with their thoughts and their wishes, but also with their abilities, they will shape the cities, right? And this is why, for me, when I started to work on the issues of urban development, I entered very much into this perspective to have a human-centered perspective on things, right? And I very much like this this quote that Lina Bobardi did once already about a building in Brazil, right? It is this sex building, you know this, right? It's Fábrica de Pompeii. There she said, the most important thing is not to know how to build well, but understand how the most of the people live. We had an experiment here, and I think this is coining very much that what I believe is so important about in what we are doing here in this program, right? On one hand, to understand, as you are also saying, we have here an experiment, and that's a social experiment, and therefore my interest in having developed an urban lab in the university as a kind of a studies program to challenge how future generations of urban, let's say, students from urban design, but also from the built environment disciplines will learn what will be their challenges to do, but also, you know, having had the possibility also to work in the ground in Ecuador, for example, for the GIZ by in the component of applied research and also in the component to develop this urban labs related with climate change. For me, it's really quite interesting to be part of this program. And if I would say one thing, I think what attracts me more on this aspect of climate change, because I mean, the entire discussion about climate change is going on since a while. But what I believe is so important in our program is that we are putting this mindset together of resilience, to say that resilience is not only a technical or a technological solution. We need also a social undertaken, and we need an infrastructure, let's say a systemic approach on something. So therefore, I think if we put this together, this is what for me is so interesting to understand how does it works. And for example, we started already to discuss these important topics here together, right? That on one hand, of course, the challenge of climate change is systematic, right? It's a systemic approach in terms of when we talk about the idea of climate injustice, then we understand very quick that we are all interrelated with each other. And we are also part of the problem, but also should be part of the solution, I would say. And therefore, I find this very important to understand this systemic approach which is there. And also what you are saying, and I am what your experience is, but also mine experience is that in any case, we need to incorporate different parts of the society, because as I also once wrote, that each part has its knowledge, right? So we cannot go for uniform solutions. We also have to understand how we locally bring them down, and with that also get the power and also the force to be able to implement them.
Yeah, interesting, Paula. This view that you mentioned, that the climate change is not infrastructure, but we got to work with people and with social innovation. That's a question I've made to myself in the last few months, how climate change and social innovation can collaborate, right? If you look to the reports from International Panel of Climate Change, we can see that the scientific evidence we have on the consequences of climate change is already sufficient to predict its effects and to act. Scientists have been warning us about this for decades. And many of us, the society formed by the government, the productive sector, and the population in general, refuse to listen, right? We have the tools to make our action effective. We're in academics, but we do not have a society committed to this cause. Let me tell you an example of what we had done with another topic in our research here in Catholic University that may show a little bit of what we expect from social innovation, right? For about 4 or 5 years, I think, we have been studying at our university the problem of residual medical products in the water of our rivers. Mm-hmm. These molecules have caused a series of environmental consequences and also potentially for the human health if the people capture streets and consume that water. After several meetings with representatives of the productive sector, like manufacturers, distributors, the Union of Pharmacies, the Union of Pharmacists, NGOs, universities, government, etc., it was found almost unanimously that the issue of reverse recycling of these pharmaceuticals would be fundamental in this process, right? So, well, now we have a municipal law, state laws, and even national legislation for the reverse recycling of useless pharmaceuticals, right? And they can structure all the change from industry to the pharmacy and back to the industry again. Well, do you think that it works? No, at all. And do you know what the problem is we are facing today? The population still prefers to throw these useless pharmaceuticals into their sewage or garbage rather than take them to the pharmacies, right? So without the collaboration of the population, the process does not work. And I think that the same is true of preparing for climate change. If the population is not sensitized, informed, educated in the whole meaning of the word education, right? And if people do not become active agents, protagonists in preparing and adapting city for the environmental effects of the climate change, the process will not work too. And it's not just investments in public infrastructure that can face the effects of climate change. Society as a whole has to participate as a protagonist of this thing, right? So I agree with you. We have these two things in common. We must to prepare our cities with infrastructure, but we have we must to have the society committed with this cause of climate change, right? These two things are very important.
Yes, and I mean, I agree completely that this is let's say, an issue, climate change, that we have to incorporate different people into the, let's say, into the production of a solution. And we understood this also from what you were presenting, from your work that you have done at the university, also with the communities, right? And also what we have discussed on this paradigmatic examples, for example, that we came across from Eric Kleineberg to understand, for example, how important is this kind of physical infrastructure, which obviously relays or is developed by how people wants to live, or how people see that living together is a better solution and you are more resilient than living by yourself and alone. And I think if you share this knowledge around different parts of society and about with training and also giving them the understanding that they are part of the solution and very welcome part, I think that's very important for the topic, I would say, right? So I think we agree on that we have to incorporate different parts of the society, but I also understand, and for me this is very this was a nice learning, for example, when I came across this entire purpose of that when you start to work with climate change, then this is an issue of mainstreaming. Natural-based solutions is developed like this, that you understand that after everything at all, it is a process, or it should be a process, right? Where you design something with different, let's say, parts of the society, different parts of the governance, but also different parts of knowledge production in terms of university, in terms of you have the climate change scientists, you have geographers, you have urbanists, architects, sociologists, and educators, which are doing this together or needs to do this together, right? So I think we're talking here about an experiment which should be a multi-actors experiment, but also should have different parts of the governance, which are still lacking, as we also see in different parts in different cities, still a big challenge that you have to do. You need to somehow to unite them. And I would say that the climate lab that we are actually here trying to imagine and trying to discuss here in our project, it is this in between all those parts, right? And it's this beautiful cell where you can somehow relate with different parts of the society, but also with different of our colleagues to find a proper process which can help us to bring us further in how to lead with, or how to at least work with the issue of the climate crisis, I would say, right?
And Curitiba has been known worldwide because she's a very clean city and planet city, right?
Yes.
And talking about climate change, I think that from our governmental point of view, Curitiba has been doing its homework, right? Mm-hmm. The local government officially embraced the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Protocol for Sustainable Development Goals. So Curitiba has been making reports of greenhouse gas emissions every, I think, 1 or 2 years, and has prepared a very interesting plan called Plan Clima, with the aim to drop down zero its greenhouse gases emissions footprint by the year 2050. It is feasible. I really don't think that could be achieved in the next 30 years. But I think that we can work in that direction, right? Mm-hmm. I think that the ClimateLabs can work together with these governmental initiatives, because they can do it in the public spaces, right? Not in the private spaces. The Plan Clima cannot operate in the private houses, and so this private spaces of the city, but we can do it, right? Mm-hmm. So working directly with this community, helping vulnerable people to prepare yourself to prepare the families, changing habits, changing its homes to face the effects of climate change. We can find people here in Curitiba that have no domiciliary water reservoirs. And so we are facing now a period of a very prolonged drought, and we have we are now facing 2 years of rationing water, mm-hmm. Drinking water in our homes. And so I think that if you do not have a sufficient reserve for 2 days or 3 days of consumption, you will have problems of lack of water in your house. And so we have lots of people facing that problem nowadays in Curitiba. Mm-hmm. So I think that the problem of climate change can be also tackled individually by more sustainable management of rainwater, permeable gardens associated with food production, systems to accumulate of rainwater and for non-potable purposes. Maybe what we call the rain gardens in the streets to minimize mm-hmm. runoff of rainwater and so on. We have lots of directions to action and to go to the community and help them to do things that can prepare the homes and the families to the climate change, right? But we must do that in agreement with the governments and the other social actors, right? To do it in a programmatic way, not in individual and disconnected way. So yeah. I think that we can operate like that.
Yeah, but then what you're saying is that it's a very important moment where on one hand you have a program which is very helpful from my experience. Secondly, you have a kind of being aware of that they are already running to a personal crisis with climate change, right? With the shortness of water. And in particular, I would say, I mean, this is what I was explaining to you with the idea or with this concepts of natural-based solutions, but also when we think more on the built environment disciplines, then also this water-sensitive urban design is very interesting, because what you are mentioning here, that it should be done in public spaces, it should be done with different people, and where also this entire problem of water, right, that you have this extreme weather events that you have to accumulate, restore, recharge, and also again help that in times of water shortness you can still use the resource again. It's an issue which is discussed, and in particular I know this from a lot of Scandinavian cities. They have water streets, and you find this really quite nice. I don't know if I showed this to you already when we met the first time in Colombia, in Caldas, in the university, because there you see people, there you see really in where the bus stop is, you have an entire information about the program that the city is undertaking, with streets, with let's say public parks, and also with this idea of urban agriculture. So it's a battery of different measurements and different purposes, which are on a beautiful way done. And what is behind this, and this is what I think we both are very agree on, this is the idea that you need different actors to work together. And therefore, this should be interesting to develop this kind of idea, or in this manner, with these mechanisms, right? It should be interesting to develop further the climate lab, or to start to enhance this with this purpose of multi-actors, with this topic very much related to water. And there we have already very interesting possibilities, at least to start, and then to adapt solutions to the local needs, I would say.
But let me ask you a question, Paul, about your urban planner side of your formation, right? I have teaching environmental planning at Catholic University in the last 20 years. But I did it not for students, undergraduate students of architecture, but for civil engineers and environmental engineers. I think that working with environmental planning in terms of urbanism by the School of Architecture, it's something that they normally do it in your undergrad courses, right? But it's completely new for civil engineers and for environmental engineers. And so we have been working with the blue-green infrastructures as example to face of kind of infrastructures to face the climate change. Because the use of blue-green infrastructures can reduce the effects of floods, of the rivers in urban environment, can improve the quality of the river waters, can store these waters, increasing its local availability. In addition, the BGIs can reduce the air temperatures and bring environmental functions like shelter of flora and fauna diversity and so on. But you know, talking about this infrastructures, Curitiba is well known as a city of many parks. We have lots of parks here, and it has a social function, and so lots of environmental functions too. And we see when we have been measuring what we call the heat island over Curitiba, and where do we have a park? We have the temperature drops down up to 7 degrees,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing to do to face this climate change effects, right? So how do you see that we can, I don't know if not to enforce this, not to students of architecture and urban planning, but for civil engineers, for all careers that use the city like your work, like civil engineers, environmental engineers, and so on. I don't know if the schools in Europe or other countries are thinking about to expand this concept of facing climate change effects in your graduation courses, for instance.
I mean, this is an experience that I made already in Ecuador at the Habitat 3 conference. This was 2016 already, where you learned very quickly that the architects and the urban designers, but also the, let's say, the urban planners, they have something which you always teach them, which is to make a design, right? To design something. It means that and in this purpose of designing, I think that there is a lot of methodological space to develop something which is very needed when we are talking about climate change education for the built environment disciplines. On one hand, it is to understand, firstly, that you have to bring the problem of climate change physically down, right? So that you understand, for example, that you need cooling points. You understand that the problems of let's say water shortage, it's related somewhere, let's say in the mountains, even outside, right? And it comes because of a systemic problem. It is also being part of the city itself. You have to take care of that. You also, when strong water is raining, you have to somehow deal with that. It's something which I think in the idea that you design something, that you are aware that you have a problem which is not unilateral. It needs to be somehow faced from different parts. And this is what we are always teaching students in urban design courses, right? That you don't build your city only by one discipline, right? You do this by a lot of disciplines, and you have to have agreements, right? And everybody needs to know its competences, but also have a greater picture of something. I would say there is something in my experience and from what I have worked with students, there's something that they very quickly understand this, because this is part of our architecture discipline, that always to make a building, to develop a city is never something from one discipline. It's always a multilateral and to agree, right? To be able to transmit plans, to incorporate people, to convince also that you're on a proper way, and you need experience. And this experience is done also in a bigger, let's say, planning table. And I would think that my experience so far has been very positive on that, because of this kind of designing component that we have, which is, I would say, a good, let's say, it's something that they are good prepared, the students, for this. And I would also say, if you look down or let's say look into what usually is always also the problem of climate change frameworks, is, as what I was saying in the beginning, that you have to be able to incorporate this into municipal plans, to city plans, and therefore you have to be able to take this kind of baseline studies, right, and to bring them down and to put them together with city management, which is also something which I would say there the planning disciplines can make a big effort and can also make a big contribution, because this is part of their disciplinary training, to understand how you work with formal, let's say, programs, but also, and this we learned already, in particular in Latin America, you know this much more better than I, that a lot of this formal programs are working with citizens together to be able to bring them down in these ideas of labtars or urban labs, something like that. And therefore, I would say, or my feedback that I can give you from the architecture and the urban design and urban planning perspective has been till now very positive, right? So that students learn very quickly and are very, very equipped because of their disciplines to deal with processes and to understand that you have to deal with different disciplines, but also with different actors in the development, municipalities, regional programs. And what I find very challenging still is that usually climate change problems are not ending in let's say when the city ends, right? So usually they are going over the city. They're even sometimes rural, urban problems, and so that they are running over municipal, but also about let's say what is this management levels, right? And therefore you need somehow to work on regional solutions, and also to understand, to trace back a problem even to things which are pretty much more far away of the city itself. And this requires, I would say, a learning that I think it's still a challenge, what I have understood from different parts.
Yes, I agree with you with this more wide view of the consequences of the climate change. And here we are trying to lead this with the water, energy, food nexus, right? I learned about that in a meeting of a professor from the UDO Center for Sustainable Development, the Arizona University, United States. And so I think that this nexus is a very objective way to access sustainability or resilience in times of crisis, right? If you are alone in a desert island, for survival purposes, you need for sure a continuous source of water, an energy source, and food, these three things. Without these three elements, no way to survive, no way to talk about sustainability or resilience or whatsoever. But look, all these basic elements, water, energy, foods, in the Brazilian reality depends upon the natural hydric resources. That's the way we choose hydrographic basin as a territory for our ClimateLab, right? So we choose the Belém River hydrographic basin. It's about 85 or 86 square kilometers in size, and it's downtown Curitiba, right? It's 100% urbanized, so it's a challenge for us because all activities that you have in the drainage area of this river have some effects on his quality and quantity of the water. So we can see very clearly the cause and the effects of the human activities in the quality and the hydric resources that we have here. So I think that for us, this will be for sure a living lab, because we are dealing with people, real people. We deal with a river, a real river, and so I think that the experience will be phenomenal in this ClimateLab project.
So that means that basically we need to understand that what the ClimateLab can be involved in, or should be involved into, should be a regional answer, or should be at least on a regional level, or?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. But I think this is basically what we were talking about, that I would say that it is in different parts, right? You have this kind of challenge to make rural urban linkages together, to try to understand how you can also work on different administrative borders, or let's say even, you know, rivers which are not stopping in one administrational canton or something, and then stopping there, and then the problem is solved. So that's quite interesting, and therefore, of course, it is important also to work with these programs, right? With that program, which is with this official programs that you were mentioning, this plan Klima. That should be very interesting that ways. Yeah, it's really something which I believe it's a challenge in itself, but I would say it sounds like that we could do a good work, I would say, because you have already identified the problem and or the setting, and it's a thing to start to work and also try to have good alliances here to develop the plan further.